Brian, you want to lead us and get us going here?
Sure, sure. Welcome to American Aboriginal, where um, we highlight a lot of yeah, lost indigenous information that have been lost by the ancestors of this land of the United States. And today, we're going to be talking with Lisa Cypress, who's going to give us an introduction to her knowledge and her story. And if it benefits you, then it benefits you. So I'm going to take it away, Lisa. We're going to get right into it. The first question, first, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having
And
me. I appreciate you guys inviting me. I really am honored to be here. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
and I can't forget my lovely co-host, LaChris Jordan, who is an expert in all that she does. LaChris.
Thank you. Well, Lisa, we're so excited to have you. And as you know, you were recommended to us by Carrie Davis, who we spoke to last week. It has been almost 2 weeks. But Carrie, as you know, spoke so highly of you. And here we are. And I almost forgot that we had been introduced to you by him. The interview had been a minute ago. And naturally,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, yes, Lisa. So we're so happy to have you. And oh my gosh, we are in for a treat today. I know we are in for a treat today. I could feel it.
I love it. I love hearing new stories about just as I'm on my journey to understanding my indigenous background. I love to hear other people's stories of uh, how they learn more about their indigenous background. You know, I love to hearing about the beginning and the trials and tribulations of where they went through it, because we can all learn from everybody's story. And so today, I want to just jump right into it. Lisa, I want to start out with the first question, because in the beginning, like at what point, when did you first know about your indigenous roots background? Like, when was the pivotal point? Take me back to that moment in time when you first had that aha moment. What event? Just walk us back to that period of time.
We always were aware that we weren't from Africa. Like that was never a thing. Um, Big Mama said we always been here, right? On my mom's side, we always been here. We're not from no Africa. Actually, my sister, because I have my siblings go from 1948 to 1968. Okay, so my mom spaced us a bit, right? So because of that, the fact that my big mama my big mama told my older sister when they went to college in the 70s. And when they went to college in the 70s, they had, and my sister had Angela Davis as one of her professors. She was one of those, like the first,
Wow.
like the people that ended up with the a little bit of affirmative action. There was about 2 good years of affirmative action, and then it ended. That's the truth. So my sister did get it because she wasn't planning on going to college. They pushed her to go to college, right? They pushed her. She ended up going to Rutgers. She had Angela Davis as a professor, all these other highfalutin people, and so you're indoctrinated with all of this, right? So she goes to see my big mama. She says, and she says, "Big Mama, so what about us coming from Africa? Do you know anything about us and how we got here?" My big mama said, "We ain't from no Africa. We always been here. We ain't from no Africa." She's like, and so my sister was like, "Well, I'm in the Biafra club. What am I gonna do? Do I need to quit the club?" Like she was just the sisters, my older sisters looked at each other. They were like, they didn't know what to think, because they're being indoctrinated by these impressive professors telling them that they're from Africa. But our big mama's like, "You crazy? What are you talking about?" Right?
Mm.
The other interesting thing about the Eastern Shore, and that's my big mama that's, with my grandfather, with the hat on. I think there's a picture of them. But she she no, not African, okay? Grew up on a plantation, so-called, right? Air Hall, not African. And when my cousins went to Air Hall to ask the so-called white European so-called plantation owners about the slaves and us being slaves, they said, you weren't slaves. And my cousins were like, he's lying. But then when you look at the records, nah, maybe not. Because we all had jobs. We all had first and last names independent of the so-called slave owner, and we all had jobs. And if you go back historically to my big mama, she descends from a Bagwell who was the first court clerk, so-called first, because who developed the courts? There's that. The courts. Okay, this is the thing. I could go real deep. I don't know where to stop. But okay, but this is the thing. So because where we're from is called Northampton, Virginia. And in that county are the oldest continuous court records in the nation. So because of that, we have court records that shows Negroes fighting for property, suing white folks, so-called. Maybe they're white. They may be Black Europeans. They may be other Indians. But it does have court records that says this Negro sued this so-and-so for that. It does have court records where the Indians are being decided in court and their last name is Johnson. How you got a Johnson that's an Indian in the 1600s? Explain that. How do you have Anthony Johnson coming here in 1619, which I have the video of the London colonial records, and there is no record of no Africans, Blacks, Negroes coming into Virginia at all from 1606 to 1622. How you explain that? How you explain the fact that John Rolfe, who they said recorded the 1619, doesn't appear in those colonial records until 1622? How are you going to, what was he doing in 1619 if he wasn't even in the records until 1622? That's Pocahontas' so-called husband. They lie about everything. But if you don't have the actual primary records, these are the actual colonial recordings.
And Lisa, that is so important that you say that.
There's
That
nothing
is
more
what I want to
than
stress. Yeah. I want to stress that to everyone watching because we see so much information from books and some of it's accurate, a lot of it's not, and we are still piecing it together. So going to the sources as primary as you can get it is key because what's happening to us is we keep getting this information in books and it's written by a professor, right? Who has all these credentials, and so he must be right. His research must be accurate.
Right. And that's the problem. And so
Wow.
we have our own anthropologist for the Virginia area. The expert of the Indians is called, her name is Helen Roundtree. Now, Helen Roundtree, why did they use Helen Roundtree? They hired Helen Roundtree to go ahead and talk about the Indians on the Eastern Shore, but my cousins wouldn't talk to her, right? So she did it without talking to the people. But the reality is this. She's the one who she recorded that Johnson is a known Indian surname in her book. She recorded that my ancestor Bagwell was the court clerk and that he went to church with the colonialists, that he socialized with them. See, but then, see, this is how wicked they are. So Bagwell had a lot of land. He had some land patents, 500 acre here, 1,000 something here. He had a lot of land patents. And so when I filed suit and related to a couple of Indian patents that were my direct relatives, I mentioned in my lawsuit Bagwell just to be a pain in the butt, just to, you know, just to annoy them, because everything I wrote in my court case, the people in that area are historians. Those are old people. All they do is they're into history. So they know everything about us more than we know about us. So I mentioned Bagwell because just to tap that, just to poke them, right? A year later, they came up with a book called Henry Bagwell, my ancestor's name. He's not like, he was a court clerk, but he wasn't, why? Because they wanted to make him into an Englishman. They wrote that he came from England and he was an Englishman. They came up with some fake records. The records, because we have expert people, like I said, when you build your nation, you get the people that you don't know exist, right? Because you find each other. So Thomas is expert at reading that stuff. He's like, that ain't a Y. That ain't a G, that's a Y. What? That ain't Bagwell, that's Baywell. Baywill. I said, that sure is a W. That sure is a I. That ain't no Bagwell at all. They made it all up. They hired an English woman to act like she wrote it. They brought her to the Eastern Shore and did a book reading, which we got kicked out of by 4 police. And I'm a member. I'm a member of the Historical Society and the Accawmacke are. We have 3 memberships to that society. We got kicked out because they didn't want us talking and telling them that, first of all, Bagwell is my ancestor. He's Negro. Here's a whole book of Bagwells, and they're all Negroes.
Wow.
Wow. You have a lot to unpack.
A lot. There's a lot.
There's a lot. We can stay on for a week and just hear you talk and just hear you tell your story. But you mentioned something about a lawsuit. Could you go into more detail about this lawsuit? And when did it when did you file it? What year? And what was the lawsuit about?
So when I repatriated the Accawmacke, and that is when you take your, because we knew, okay, this is the thing. I knew we were Indian. I didn't know our names. We were, the old folks say you're Cherokee, you know what I mean? Or they might say you're Blackfoot, or they say stuff like that, right? But see, they're using the term of the time that they lived in, right? They're not using the ancient names because those get changed, because that's how they get you disconnected from who you are, by calling you Negro, back colored, and African American. They changed our names as Accawmackes. We're Accawmantas up in Canada and in Maine. We are at Accawmacke in Massachusetts. We're Accawmacke here, right? So the Accawmacke, they're actually, and then they changed our name to Powhatan because one of our kings was Powhatan, but they never tell you who his nation was, right? You assume that it's the Powhatan nation. There is no such thing as a Powhatan nation. He was King Powhatan. They say he formed the Powhatan Confederacy. No, it couldn't have been the Powhatan Confederacy because he didn't form it. His predecessors did. So it's really the Accawmacke Confederacy, if you want to be accurate. But they changed the names.
Where did the Accawmacke originate? Where was it in Northampton or?
Northampton is where our main village, our main kingdom is. As a matter of fact, a white man in 1911 named Jennings wrote a book called The Kingdom of Accawmacke. You can't take that lightly. You can't take that lightly, because when I first read it, I was like, kingdom. But then when you learn, you're like, we really were a kingdom. We went all the way to Canada, down to there, going to Alabama. We was a real kingdom.
That's deep.
And our king patented land all around there. Like, so then you
Mhm.
think, well, who made the patents? They act like the King of England did it, but it couldn't have been
Yeah.
because there were patents in England. How would that make? How would they not have patents in England and we have patents here, right? So who was the crown that actually created the patent system? Us. It'll only make
Deep,
sense.
deep, deep, deep. Wow.
Can we
We were a very advanced society.
can we so going back to this lawsuit, what was
Yeah.
what year and what and can you who was the lawsuit against and why?
So as you repatriate the people, we are we are the Accawmackes, and you like I was, and I kind of want to. I'll get to I'll try to get to the lawsuit, but you got to understand it. It started as just our families coming together, and then me making Facebook groups to say, "Are you Accawmack?" and actually looking for
Mhm.
people. Like, wait a minute, you got some cousins that got this name, that name. You got people that's
Right,
from Virginia. Are you an Accawmack? You might be an Accawmack. So I actively
right.
was looking for Accawmacks, right? And I
Yeah.
formed a private group and then added people as they seemed interested to the private group and built upon it. And then you have an enrollment form, then you also build your affidavit where you change your identity and you let the government know you betrayed me. This is what you did to my people. This is who I really
Mhm.
am. This day forward, this is who I am. You owe me tax money. You need to get me and anybody out of jail because you don't have the right to jail us. The affidavit says a lot of things,
Mhm.
and it's used for a lot of things. It's used to send to the IRS. It's used to send to all these different government agencies. It can be used to send to the DAs of the different districts you drive or travel in. You can use it as far as you want to. You can send it to the fishing department, the Homeland Security, everything, right? But that is where you declare and you clarify who you really are. And that's the process they
Mhm.
go through. And then they may get their Accawmacke ID card. We have plates that are being made. This is a process, right? So that's done. So we're learning about these patents. Like I said, that Henry Bagwell had land. I have a lot of relatives that have land patents. They relegated us to the first reservation in the nation. We are the first. Now, I always thought about that. Now, why would we be the first? And they talk about the Pamunkeys and all this, but we're the first reservation because they hid who we were. We were so big, they hid us. And that's
Mm.
why they got rid of us first. We were the first one to have a reservation and the first ones to so-called have it gone. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So because of this, I have relatives that have several plats that's in a park. And I also have relatives, a aunt, no, sorry, all these are grandparent that has a allotment that's where PNC Bank is now. So the person that taught me to pro se sue to help me file, because what happened was at first I was claiming my land. I quit claiming my land. I said, this is my land. Based upon us being Accawmacke, we have the right, based upon our patent, granting it to us, from us. We have the right to be the grantor and the grantee because we are the patent holders. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I claimed the land in the court. The clerk was like, you can't do this. This is not gonna let see, court clerks are not supposed to give you advice. They're supposed to process your documents. But she violated her role and she continues to
Mm.
do so.
Mm.
So when she did that, she sent out the notice, or had somebody, an underling, send out a notice saying they could not be transferred. That is also illegal. They are not judges. They do not judge who has the right to the property. If the person that is occupying the property has a problem, then they got to come and deal with it. But the court clerks, anybody in the daggone court, they don't have the right to be the judge of that. They violated their roles. So now I'm dealing with that. But anyway, basically, so that was in 2021 that I quit claimed it, and they denied it. What do you do when they deny it? Got to file a suit. So he was like, you file an ejectment shoot. I said, okay, you can file an ejectment. I said, get off that means get out off my land, right?
Mm.
So file an ejectment claim. The person that taught me how to do it he's in another country. He's a brother in another country. But he wanted to go to law school. People try to say he's actually was like planning on going to law school in California, but he
Now
never
pause
did.
real quick. You said file a what? What was that you just said?
Ejectment claim. An
An,
ejectment claim.
an
Mm.
ejectment claim. Because I want listeners, those who are listening, I want them to take from your story and they could pull it and possibly follow the same protocol that you did. So I want to make that
Yes.
clear. So if anybody
Mhm.
listening, so an ejectment claim,
I
right?
wouldn't do that. If now what I know as an Indian, I wouldn't do that. From
Mm.
what I know as an Indian, see, Indians can do different things differently than if you're just a Negro or and
Got
black.
it.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as an
Yeah.
Indian, I would file a quiet title. That's the most powerful thing. It says, whose is it? Quiet title
Mhm.
says, screw that. Who be the owner? And
Yeah.
you get it clear once and for all. That's the best way. You ain't got to tell them get out. Be like, okay, we're gonna figure out whose this is. Period.
So
That's
Right.
probably the
so
most powerful thing that I would do. I wouldn't have done that. But see, I didn't know. So I'm learning from him, and he has used it to get back his grandmother's property and different things in the States as a deeded property, right? This is
Hmm.
patented land and it's historical and it's Indian, and so different things work better, right? And having
Sure.
gone through this, I would say I would file quiet title. But anyway, so basically the ejectment was filed. We're doing it at a distance. So he's sending me like, stuff to, to type up and do whatever and print and all this. And it's very complicated because I'm researching. I'm going to the courthouse researching these deeds, getting these deeds out, getting all the deeds out to know the actual chain of title. The chain of title from how it got from the Indian to these other people, right? And then you
Yes.
have to have
Yes.
all your genealogy. You have to know how it got from your ancestor to these other
Hmm.
people and how to trace it to you. So you
That's
have to
right.
prove that all in writing and your court documents. All that needs to be presented. But that's all
Hmm.
me, right? I'm doing that on my own, right? And so I'm in the courthouse all the time, looking at getting these documents, getting them stamped, doing this, looking at that, and as I'm looking at it, I'm like, this stuff look fraudulent, right? I'm finding these court doc deeds that this guy says his wife is one name in this paragraph and another name in another paragraph.
That's
I'm like,
right.
this is fraudy. They started writing it and then they forgot what they were writing about and picked it up and forgot the name of the wife that they used. Linda at one point and something else at the bottom and at the bottom. I said,
Yeah.
So I actually got a handwriting expert to look at it, to look at the
Mm.
deeds, some of the deeds, and I said, this looks very fraudy. They said, ma'am, I don't look at records from the 1800s. I don't know what a 1800 handwriting is. I said, just do me a favor, just examine it. He
Right.
was like, oh, he said, yeah, I can verify this is fraud. I said, okay, thank you. So I got him he did the document. He's a handwriting expert. He certified that was fraud in the deed. Very interesting. Also, it was very hard for me to find somebody to survey. We need more of us to be surveyors. We need our young people to go into surveying. Although now we have drones, so
Mm.
we kind of got a workaround. That's a workaround.
Yeah.
Drone
Sure.
surveying. However, that is very key because they control the surveying. And when I tried to get a surveyor, none of these surveyors in Virginia they were like, hell no. Racist
Wow.
would not come
can you
because
explain?
they
Mm.
know, because they get most of their money from these rich land oligarchs, these rich racketeers of land,
Yeah.
right? So yeah,
Yeah.
they're not gonna help me. I had to go and
That's
get
right.
out of state and find a forensic surveyor engineer who could look at the
Wow.
information, maps, everything, and verify that my ancestors' land was where PNC Bank was.
Wow. Lisa, this is so deep. I'm so glad you're going into detail like this because you know, man, it's you recognize that to really do this properly, to do this right, it's work. The same deceit that was used to take it from you, you're going to have to go in and do this work to get it back.
Right.
And there's
Right.
no messing around. Um, thank you, Lisa. This is amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. Okay.
I applaud you.
Mhm.
The data that you're putting out is helpful. The work that you've done will be a stepping stone for future generations.
I was filing on my own, right? And from the next 2 years, I'm in litigation back and forth with the court, a judge that was a brother at the time, actually, and against the board of supervisors for the county, right? The county was my opponent because and also PNC Bank. Now, PNC Bank, those lawyers weren't very bright, I must say. They weren't very good. They were being assisted by the county attorney. She was knowledgeable. She knew about the land patch. She knew about the Indians. They knew nothing. They were completely lost. But if not for her helping them, but the problem is, they changed judges for at the end of 2 years, and they put in this younger person who just became a judge like a year ago.
Mm.
And in 2 months, she just dismissed my case, that it was statute of limitations, which is not true. There is no statute of limitations for a land patent. That violates the land patent. Land patent's law. The land patent is constitutionally upheld. She takes a pledge to uphold the Constitution. She violated her oath by disrespecting the land patent.
Mm.
Then I took it to the appellate court, the U.S. appellate court. They did the same. They agreed with her. And I was just devastated. I couldn't believe that the corruption was like that they just slammed the patent, and the fact that this is valid, all the evidence I have, the fraud in the court, the daggone, these are all my grandparents. What? Really? I was, and in when they dismissed it, I think it was in her court or appellate court. Appellate court, before they dismissed it, the board of supervisors for the park didn't even appear. They didn't even file an appearance. So I had already filed a declaratory judgment against them. Like, they didn't appear, dismiss them, because they didn't appear in court. So I filed for a declaratory judgment against them. And what I got back was a dismissal on me. They failed to appear, and the judges were that corrupt in the appellate court. They dismissed my case.
Wow.
And my case, if you look it up on Pacer, if you're one of those people that is involved in the law and you have a Pacer account, you can't even read my case. They've hidden it. They've shadowed my case. You can't even read it in its entirety. You know,
And why do you think that is?
why do you think it is?
Wow.
Well,
Because
Yes.
they don't want people knowing about this. They don't want
Right.
people to know
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
If your case goes through it and then they say, hey, how many more people in line that we got to deal with?
Well, Lisa, let me ask you this, because I do want to talk about Nat Turner, but I want to, before we get into that, what is this Landback movement where you're reading about quote unquote Native Americans getting their land back? How is that? Is that
Well,
similar, or
it's
what's that
not
all about?
real. It's not
Okay.
real. It's fake
Okay.
news, because this is what a Native American is. A Native American is a word of the United States.
Yeah.
They made up the term. It's a term that they use for themselves when they came as new immigrants. It's an
Yes,
immigrant
you're
term.
right.
It is
Yes.
not the term of the indigenous people. So when you decide to say, please recognize me, you also say, I don't trust myself. You know what I mean? You're
Mhm.
like, I don't trust myself. I need your help. You know what I mean? You're begging.
Right. Yeah.
And so your status and your power is diminished. And you obviously don't know, or you don't have any real authority here, because why would you ever do that? So when they
That makes
actually, when
total
you read
sense.
deeply into the cases, you see the articles. Oh, they gave them 1,000, 3,000. You don't see, but people don't read deeply and they don't know because they're not in this fight. So when I read it, I'm like, okay, they have stewardship. They say stuff like they've given them stewardship, or they'll
Uh,
say things like they have a partnership with the United States. That means you don't own shit. That means
wow.
you can't build on it. You can't do nothing to it. You're just a gardener. You're like the caretaker. You
Right.
might be able to stand on it, like, and maybe have a circle on it, but you can't build or do anything real without the government say so. See, I know how it
Yeah.
really works because when I started in this journey, they put people out there to kind of like steer me around. They put me with the Accawmacke Indians of Maryland, who are actually supposed are really part of the Accawmackes, right? So the Accawmackes, this nation is filled with white people. They actually got recognition through Maryland, so they claimed that their territory went all the way up to there, which is fine. It's probably true because the boundaries are not what we didn't have these boundaries, right? So they claimed that they were in Maryland. A lot of people got mad because they got recognition ahead of a lot of Maryland nations. So
Mm.
they got recognition. The government gave them a grant for $2 million the first year. The second year, they gave them a grant for $200,000. And, then they started fighting and they broke up. They divided up. Now they both calling each other fake Indians. The government, they called me, the chief, the former historian chief. He told me not to even organize my people as Accawmacke. He said to call us descendants of Accawmacke. See, the white man,
Oh,
they call themselves the real Accawahans, but I'm not supposed to be a real Accawmacke. I'm supposed to be a descendant of. You see how they do you?
wow. The
Then he put
audacity.
me on with somebody from the BIA, and that's his friend that helped them get recognition. And I talked to her on the phone. She's like, they're not giving anybody recognition. I said, first of all, they don't give anybody anything. And I think I said, ma'am, it's a new day. And I don't think you quite understand how the world has changed now. So they don't get to recognize anybody anyway. Okay. That day's over. Okay. So that was the end of our conversation. He called me to Maryland because he was like going to teach me about how to hobnob with senators, right? So we ride up there. We meet with the senator in this old courthouse, and he's a Republican, and it's a bunch of Republicans that are there that are kind of, they're special. And his nation, he has some members there. And what it was a begging session. They wanted the government gave them a grant and then took $70,000 away from them. So you already spent the money you owe. Now you owe the government. That's how they treat
Right.
those Native Americans. That's how they treat them. You want to be a Native American that's recognized? You want them giving you a damn grown grant and then taking it away from you? You want that?
Wow. Yeah.
Mm. See,
Yeah,
I
that's not
know
a,
it
it's a
because I
trick bag.
close up and personal. I've seen it personally what is done. Okay, so anybody talking about what they want, they don't know what they want. Half the time, they don't even know what they're asking for.
Hmm.
Right. Wow. Well, Lisa, I definitely want to earlier before we got deep in it, you talked about what set off the Nat Turner um man, I hate calling it a rebellion because I think that's
I
so
call it the Indian War. It's an Indian war. Yeah, the Nat
right.
Turner War.
Yes.
Nat is a known
Yes.
Indian name. Turner's a known Nottoway name. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an Indian war. Okay, so
Right.
why was there an Indian war? What was happening at the time? Now, what I mentioned it in the course of, like, we talked about me fighting in this court case, and I said to
Mhm.
you, we've been fighting. I didn't know how much we've been fighting, but in
Yeah.
researching, and the more you get very specific with your people, found
Mhm.
out that an ancestor, another Bagwell on my grandma's side, Mary, and others had what's called freedom suits. Now, see, they are classified in the Library of Virginia as freedom suits, so they kind of act like they're manumission things, but that's a lie. These were actually identity suits. They were suits where we were saying, we ain't no Negroes. We're
Yeah.
Indians. These suits exist. They don't teach you about them, but people were saying, I ain't no Negro. I'm an Indian.
Mhm.
She had filed suit. Several other Accawmackes had filed suit and won. And then they went back to file for their land and won 3,000 acres. That was in 1830, 1831. The Nat Turner Uprising or the Nat Turner War happened at that same time.
Yeah.
So we were probably partying. Everybody was probably feeling themselves. We got
Yeah.
3,000 acres, we got a land back,
Right.
we
Right.
partying nonstop. Our cousins from the other, neighboring tribes, we all getting together. They're supposed to get free. Nat Turner was supposed to be free. That's the other reason that is a catalyst for that war, is that Nat Turner was at the age of freedom. 31 was the age. It was either 31 or 5 years or 7 years for indentureship. And slavery did not start no boat. It started with indentureship. It started with debt bondage.
That's
Or
right.
it started in prisoners of war because we warred with them. They took us to Barbados and then they put us back wherever they wanted to bring us back to, right?
Mhm.
So it's either that made you a permanent slave. So prisoner of war made you a permanent slave. Debt bondage made you a temporary slave that they made into a permanent slave via the slave codes. That's the third way they made you a slave. The slave codes legislated you into slavery. If your mama was not a Christian, you were a forever slave. And they didn't tell you that. So when Nat Turner turned 31 and he thought he was going free and all his cousins were turning 31 and they thought they were going to be free, they're like, you still a slave
Right.
forever. And they were like,
Right.
oh, heck
Oh
no.
no.
And then they're like, yeah, and we ain't giving you ain't giving us a land back. What? And it was like, So then next thing you know, what happened after my people won the suit, their cousins and everybody was fighting over the slavery and all that.
Right.
The Indian Removal Act. The Indian
Yes.
Removal Act is right after that. The
Right
Trail of
after.
Deer right after that.
Mhm.
It is the explanation of what was the catalyst that created the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears. We was trying to fight to get our land back. We had actually won our land back. We was trying to maintain our freedom. And they were like, oh, we got to break these people up. We got to separate them. We got
That's
to
what's up.
remove them.
That's what's
We
up.
got to war with them with our cannons and then remove them. Divide them up and conquer them. Send them packing, scare them and scatter them.
Yep, that's what happened to my third great grandmother. It was, I think it was the Tellico Treaty. All this stuff happened around the Tellico Treaty, and they left or were pushed out of Kentucky and moved to Ohio. And I always wondered about why at that time, but you're really putting a big historical context to the removal, because everyone talks about the Trail of Tears in the South, but they
Right.
don't talk about the Trail of Tears all up and down the coast and how everyone was
Right.
just moved.
Everybody was moved. It was an
Yep,
Indian Removal Act. They moved everybody, and they had a
everybody.
some people had a choice. They were forced out, but they were like, you can go to Oklahoma, or you can stay
Mhm.
here, but you ain't gonna keep what you got.
Yeah,
You're gonna have to
yeah,
go. And they just let the Europeans come in and take all your stuff, your furniture, everything you had. They just got everything, your livestock. They just stripped you of all you, and we were wealthy people. It was
yes.
frustrating because they were bringing these poor people here, promising them the world, and there was no world for them to take. We were still living our best lives.
Mm-hmm.
We were in the
You're right.
way of their dream. We were in a
You
way
know,
to
it
agree.
makes
So all
so
the
much
sisters were,
sense, so much sense, because you have
so
to say to yourself, how did the, whether it was the pale European and melanated European, how did they come and figure it all out so quickly? How do they have all
they did,
this? Yeah, it makes no
they
sense
didn't.
from a time frame perspective, even that they were
Right.
able to have all the land and the towns, and they had everything was just running smoothly. you know. Uh,
And they couldn't get right where they were. See, this is the other thing you have to understand. You have to understand, like with the slave trade, this is what doesn't make sense. Because in
yeah.
Europe in the 1600s and the 1500s, they were warring constantly. They were broke
Yes, yes,
because
yes,
war is
yes,
expensive, right?
yes, yes,
Then, in
yes.
addition to that, they had multiple plagues, plague, and then another plague, and then another plague. And
Yeah.
then they had all this filth. They didn't know anything about disease. We didn't have a plague in America. Why? Because we knew about germ theory. This is the crazy thing about it. When you look at history, you're like, okay, I'm a nurse. They worship um Florence Nightingale. She's an
Mm,
English woman.
mm,
Now in England, nurses were considered sluts. They were women of the night. They were not respected. They
mm,
loved Florence Nightingale because she brought some respect to nursing, but you know how she did it? She was a wealthy aristocrat. She was not anybody that was like a worker who she didn't even wash her own butt or clean her own clothes, right? She was a wealthy well-made woman, right? So how in the world does she know? Because they credit her with learning about cleaning and this and that and this. She worked in the Crimean War, and we
mm.
were there from the islands. We were
Yeah.
there in the Crimean War saying, clean that, you nasty butt, you do that, what you doing? No, clean that. And that's how she learned that a clean environment is the key to health. We taught her that. She wrote
Yes.
it down and the credit for it.
You know, I was over, I've been to Scotland 3 times and took various tours, and this was a more personalized tour. And we went to the underground part of Edinburgh. Edinburgh is very hilly, but they
Mm,
talked about how in the capital, they would just throw all of their everything, excrement, everything onto the street. And it was Edinburgh was a very nasty, you could smell Edinburgh miles away before you even got there. And
mm,
literally when
mm,
we're down there walking through where, the poor people used to live, you can literally still smell. You can smell the
you can still
animals.
smell it.
I, I mean, I have a strong sense of smell, and when you're empathic, you just pick up a lot of things. And I could still
Mm,
smell the animals. I could still smell it. I mean, it was
mm,
so embedded into the walls. And they even had
mm,
in certain aspects of the quote unquote apartments, small as they were, they had a
mm,
like a ditch, and it would whatever you had, you just put it in the ditch and would just run out into the street. And
see?
this is, and of course, you've got the amazing Edinburgh Castle high on the hill, and the royals are just, they're never going to be walking on that, but you will if you're just a commoner. So it's just like
Right.
incredible, incredible, these stories.
But see, this is the thing we don't really think about in context of they didn't have any theory.
Yeah.
They weren't washing. They weren't taking
Yeah.
baths. So how would you transport Africa? First of all, they didn't have the resources to to have
Right.
boats built to go to just transport for help. That first of all, then you got to know the truth about America, because when you see our records, you see they weren't slaves, they were indentured. So if the
Right.
first Negroes that they mention in records are indentured, why would they go to Africa for a temp worker? You wouldn't survive the trip. The cost is in the millions, right? It's in the millions if you were to put it on these days' terms. It's in the millions to even get these people.
Yes.
And then you're only going to keep them for 3 to 5 years, and then they can sue you afterwards for the goods they owe you. You owe them,
Wow.
sue you. And they know
And
how
be,
to. And there are no
yeah,
record of African interpreters in America. That's the
there
other
you
thing.
go.
There are none.
And
How would you
B
deal with
can
all the
speak to
languages?
this. Wow. And B, you can speak to this too. When you travel by land, I mean, when you travel by water, when you're traveling that far, your body is going to atrophy as well. So how the heck are you sailing all these miles and by the time you arrive your body's atrophied? And you don't no one talks about what happened when you came here. Were you
Right.
ready to go?
You're laying and urine
Right.
and vomit and all that stuff. And you really, you couldn't even push the boat with sails. You would have to have rowers at the people rowing at the bottom, really, to propel the weight of that. You know, you really wouldn't have a regular sailboat wouldn't be able to do it. Like it's not. No, it doesn't. And how would you carry enough water for them to
Hmm.
consume and food?
Sustainable water at that. You know, instead of
Right.
the sea, the seawater would just dry them out. You know.
The seawater is going to kill you. It'll kill you.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Wow. A lot of people don't think about those little small details. For years, they had me. You know, I bought into the story, and then I started
Sure.
hearing.
Right.
I think one way to preserve this is through ancestors. Now, and I always encourage people, if you have elder people in your family, you need to be asking, because when they die, they leave with data. They leave
Hmm.
with data. And
Yeah,
so
you got to talk to them.
and so we can be stuck in ignorance. We can use our phones to educate or to entertain ourselves. How are we
Mhm.
really, we don't know who we are. And when we don't know who
But
we are,
they also misused our elders because we have all these slave narratives. These people weren't
yes,
slaves.
yes,
These
yes,
people were sharecroppers, but they got their stories and they labeled them slave narratives so they can sit up there and say, "See, we got proof. This old guy's talking about being a slave." Really?
correct.
It's bull crap. Because
To, to
we had what 20 some HBCUs in 1866. Explain that. Explain the
mm,
fact that we had Rebecca Crumbler, who was a nurse, and she was a contemporary of Nightingale, but she actually went to college to be a nurse. She went to college, and
Hmm.
she went to college to be a doctor after she was a nurse. But nobody makes her the premier nurse or the premier doctor. See, our greatness predates their greatness. You start looking at film. If you start looking at old films and start looking and looking, you'll see that there's a lot of really good Negro old films in 1911. Huh?
That's
They
right.
don't have that many great films that they were making in 1910, 11. How come we got films that are better than theirs? Start looking
speak,
into some old films. You'll see they got better. We got better films than they do in those early days. What was going on? It was because we were winning. We've been winning. We just
And
started
winning.
losing in the last 60 years. We had our own separate nation. They say you don't have a culture. We had our own nation. We had 500 Negro hospitals. We had all kinds of towns. We had all kinds of banks. We were doing international trade all over the place.
Yeah,
We had
that's right.
stores. Right this weekend, I'm gonna be fighting. Well, I'm fighting my case, but right this weekend, I'm probably gonna be fighting about this Rosenwald school because people, Negroes, want to celebrate these Rosenwald schools, and they're gonna resurrect one on the Eastern Shore, and they want to call it African American school. And I'm like, stop backdating this African American to people that weren't African American. It's not
Yeah.
proper to call these people what they weren't. The other thing is, what is the Rosenwald School anyway?